Hey everybody, welcome to Culinary Characters Unlocked. I'm David Page. On this episode, a pioneer in the creation of California cuisine, famous for his food and for his battles with restaurant owners he says were not doing things right. More than 4 decades later, he says he's mellowed, but his standards have not changed. And he's still in the kitchen at his own place in the Napa Valley. Here's Ken Frank. Chef, how you doing? Thanks for being here.
Great to be here.
Thanks for joining me. You were a major figure in the creation of California cuisine and popularizing seasonality, and had, in that respect, a great impact on the course that American cuisine took over the past half century. How you feeling about where we are now?
I was in the right place at the right time. It's been a fantastic ride. If I had started 4 or 5 years earlier, probably wouldn't have been as great an opportunity. I started at exactly the right time, and it was entirely an accident. I had always loved to cook, but when my family moved to Europe for a year in 1972, I went to French public school, lived in a French village on Lake Geneva. And at the end of the year, I was having so much fun, I wanted to stay. And my parents said, well, if you find a family to live with and get a job, you can spend the summer and come home at the end of the summer. So I did. I got a job as a dishwasher. When I came back for my junior year in high school, I desperately wanted to go back because I loved France and I loved working. I loved this village. I had great friends there. So I got a job flipping burgers in a local ski resort in Southern California on the weekends to pay my way back, and spent a second summer cooking there. And by then I was hooked. My senior year in high school, I got a job after school working in a local French restaurant. At the time, it's like, wow, this is going to pay my way through college. I went down to UC Irvine and enrolled in pre-med, and I was either going to be a doctor or I was going to be a marine biologist. Got a job working in the best restaurant in Newport Beach as a line cook. And after about 3 months, it's like, I hate school. I love cooking. I'm going to be the American Paul Bocuse. And of course, that never happened. But I mean, I've been cooking full time ever since. And it was just luck.
But before you went to France, now I assume you were studying French in high school so you could speak when you got over there?
You know, I went to a very fine private school where both my teacher parents taught. That was the school that had this innovative program to send teachers to live abroad so that the teachers would be a more worldly influence on the student body, which is how I got to France in the first place. So I'd been taking French since 3rd grade, and I had a vocabulary of a couple hundred words. But we got to France, I was 15 and enrolled in French public school. And I was young enough, so I still had a soft, childlike brain that was soft enough to just absorb French without really trying. Now, granted, I was in school and class every day and everything was in French, but within a few months, I was comfortable. And by the end of the first year, when I came back, I was speaking with almost no accent and essentially fluent French.
Before going to France and becoming a French, how do you say dishwasher in French?
Plunger.
Okay, fine.
The plunge is where you put the pots.
Before that, had you been cooking at home? Was there a culinary influence in the house?
I always liked to eat. I always loved cooking. And I was the oldest grandson with an awesome grandfather who was first generation California, born in California. His parents actually emigrated to California in the 1890s while his mom was pregnant.
From where?
From the Midwest. He was born in LA. He did a lot of different things. He was super smart guy, holds a couple of patents. He grew up on a farm. He was also an engineer. So he ran a business called Eagle Rock Frosty Foods in the 50s and 60s. It was basically a giant walk-in freezer with lockers in it and a butcher shop in the front. And people would buy a quarter or a half a steer and have him cut it for them and wrap it up custom. And then they would keep it in their freezer locker that they had to keep. They'd come once a week and they'd open their locker and they'd get meat out and take it home. And my grandfather was a refrigeration engineer. So he did the butcher shop and then he did the engineering. But I used to spend weekends at his house And one of my favorite things was getting up in the morning to make breakfast with him. He was good with food. He was a really good cook. We used to make candy from scratch, and when I'm 8 years old, this guy pulling out a recipe book and a sugar thermometer, and an hour later we have candy. To me, I mean, this guy was a freaking genius, because I thought candy just came from the store and it was in a wrapper, but no, you can actually make it in a pot on the stove. So I'd always liked cooking, and he was a great influence, and honestly really still is. He's the one that taught me how to fix everything, and I'm still the repairman too.
Okay. So with that antecedent, with that background in France, and I'm guessing that the chemistry courses in pre-med were not your favorite for some reason?
I love chemistry. I love science. Science and math were always two great subjects. I hated English. Reading fiction books was just so boring to me, and then having to write a report about some story. I loved science.
So why'd you look up and say, to hell with pre-med, I want to cook?
Because I realized I didn't like the kids I was going to school with, who were mostly going to school in pre-med because they thought it was going to be lucrative. I loved the science, and I could still be a marine biologist. I mean, Jacques Cousteau was one of my favorite customers when I had the restaurant in Los Angeles. And
hold on, Jacques Cousteau was a customer?
Cooking for him was always such a thrill. I just, the whole pre-med thing, kids were mostly doing it because they thought they were going to be doctors, and doctors made a lot of money. And that's not why I'm doing this. And I really loved cooking, and I was making $4 an hour. That was money.
I assume Jacques Cousteau ate seafood.
He ate seafood, and he always had an omelet for lunch.
Okay. Let's go through your early career. You start cooking in college. When's it get serious?
When I left college, I moved back up to Los Angeles. I got a job working at Perino's in downtown Los Angeles. Very famous at the time, considered the finest restaurant in Los Angeles. On its last legs after a 30-year great run, Mr. Perino had retired. It was a union house. I worked there for about 2 months.
Doing what?
I was the lunchtime entremetier. So my job was to make all of the vegetable garnishes and all of the starches, and tomato soup, and gnocchis. We made everything to order. There was a crew of 5 or 6 of us. We did, 15, 20 lunches a day. It was super classic. I was 19. Everybody else working in the kitchen was at least 60 and had been there for decades.
Well, how'd you get the gig?
Because they needed a cook. I spoke French, and I knew how to make some food. And when I started cooking in the 70s, with the knowledge I had of a couple of summers working in a very simple restaurant in France, I spoke fluent French. I knew my way around the kitchen, and I'm a quick learner, and I'm an instinctively pretty good cook. But, 50 years ago, if you spoke French and knew how to make vinaigrette and 2 kinds of soup, you were a chef. The criteria for getting a job back then was very different than it would be now. Again, I was lucky to be in the right place at the right time.
Well, how'd you get from there to La Guillotine?
I got a lucky break. A famous chef in Los Angeles, Jean Bertourneau, who had run La Chaumière on Beverly Drive in Beverly Hills for about the previous 10 years, had just sold his half and was just opening L'Hermitage on La Cienega, which was a transformational restaurant for Los Angeles.
I remember.
Oh, it was transformational. But when he sold his half and left, it created an opening at the bottom of the kitchen he was leaving behind, and I got a job there. And I worked there for exactly a year, working for his previous sous chef. Part of the deal was that guy had to stay, executing his menu. And that's when I learned how to make sauce. That's the year I learned the most about really good French cooking.
Because you had never, to this day, you don't have, quote, culinary training.
Oh, no, I'm entirely, I just learned by working. And what I learned in the kitchen in France was how to work your ass off in the kitchen and speak fluent French and have knife skills and things like that. And the rest, I just worked hard, and usually the first few weeks in a job was pretty scary because I didn't know anything and I had to learn it fast, but I learned it fast enough so I didn't get fired. And then I just kept learning, and I probably spent 5 or 6 months working at a half a dozen good French restaurants in Los Angeles. Virtually all of them doing essentially the same menu. They all had a crispy half a duck with some kind of fruit sauce on it. They all had steak au poivre. They all had some kind of fish almondine. They all had endive salad. By the time I was 21, I was offered my first job as chef de cuisine at a restaurant in Santa Monica called Les Pyrénées. And I accepted the job, but before I could start, it got interrupted because the chef at Les Pyrénées was leaving Les Pyrénées to go be a partner in a new restaurant called La Guillotine. He got cold feet and backed out. He kept his job at Les Pyrénées. La Guillotine is 6 weeks from opening and they needed to hire somebody, so they hired me.
We'll be right back. After all of these months of cooking the standard French menu in America, you went nuts. To read about you, look, this is the quote. You first achieved national acclaim as the 21-year-old chef of La Guillotine, a pioneer for the time. He insisted on using only the freshest and finest seasonal ingredients. Where'd that come from?
It came from the foods that I'd cooked largely at La Chaumière as daily specials.
La Chaumière in
Beverly Hills, which was Jean Bertranou's old restaurant. So the year I spent there was the year that I learned how to cook really good sauces and really interesting things. And every day there was a special. And the specials were things that were not on every other menu in Los Angeles. And those were the ones that were particularly compelling to me. So I put together a menu that was largely inspired by those specials that I had learned, specifically great fresh fish, poached to order with a sauce finished to order in the pan. And there were 2 items on that menu that had a little asterisk next to them that were creations of the chef. And creations of the chef on a menu in Los Angeles in 1976 was just because I wanted to do it, but it was radical. One was a duck dish and one was a sweetbread dish.
You were selling sweetbreads to the LA crowd?
With a port wine and green peppercorn sauce.
Did they know that it was thymus gland?
For the most part, yes. LA in the 70s was beginning to become a gourmet town. It was behind New York for sure. The whole country was. It was behind San Francisco for sure. But it was going to catch up and lap them. Specifically, people in the entertainment business in particular traveled to Europe and ate better food, came back to LA and were an audience for things like, do you know in Italy that the pasta they make is fresh? It's not dried in a bag. Again, I was in the right place at the right time. There was quite a demand in LA for better food, and I scratched the itch at the right time.
But you weren't there very long because you were 21 years old when you went there. And yet when I read about you at Michael's, it says you were 21. So
Michael's was 23. I was at La Guillotine for about 6 months. We got rave reviews in the LA Times and California Magazine. And all of a sudden the restaurant was packed. And I remember when I was hired, before we opened, I remember very much specifically asking the owners, how many people are we going to serve a night? For example, this year on New Year's Eve, the busiest night of the year, what is your dream come true? How many people are we going to do on New Year's Eve? And they said, probably 80 people. So I planned a menu that I was confident I could execute for 80 people. And very quickly, we were doing 100 or 120. The owner was asking people to leave, presenting the check and telling people it was time to leave when their meal was done so he could pack more people in because he was greedy. And I told him, look, when you hired me, you said 80 people. This is my food. It's got my name on it. Either we cut it off at 80 people a night or you get a new chef. And he said, I don't need you. And so I left and they were closed within 2 months. The LA Times actually printed a retraction of the review because I left, which was unprecedented at the time. And then LA Magazine, with a longer lead time, was late to the story. So they printed a story about my ultimatum and my leaving. And by then I was big news.
Look, in 2002, David Shaw wrote an article, I guess in the LA Times, in which he, talking about one of your career moves, calling you the longtime enfant terrible of the Los Angeles restaurant world. He had so many brutal battles with his bosses at various restaurants, but I always thought it appropriate that he made his first splash here at a restaurant named La Guillotine. Were you a hothead?
I was a normal chef. I was also famous, and I was also really young. that amount of fame at a really young age, not necessarily a good thing. Look at rock stars, and they don't necessarily all behave really well when they're 20 or 21 either. But in retrospect, a lot of the arguments I had with my bosses were over ethics. They were over not paying people overtime. They were over using frozen fish and calling it fresh. They were over saying that we made something in-house that we didn't. And I wasn't going to be part of that. And I had the temerity to speak freely to the press about the things that I thought were wrong with the restaurant business. I had not yet learned that when you're talking to someone in the press, unless you have a specific off-the-record agreement that everything you say, you should expect to see published.
Yes, you should.
And now I understand how we can have a conversation on background and then be careful to say nice things about people or nothing at all unless it's really merited. I'm older and wiser. It happens.
Okay, you got even more famous at your next, I mean, I don't know, did you go to a variety of places between La Guillotine and Michael's?
After La Guillotine, I went back to work at a number of different, very good LA French restaurants where I had friends working in the kitchen. And for about a year, the better part of that year, I would do vacation shifts. So someone would want to take 3-4 weeks off and go back to France via his family. So I would fill in as a vacation cook for a couple of weeks.
You were a relief pitcher.
I was a relief pitcher. And then I got hired by some Frenchmen to open the next restaurant I opened, which was called Club Élysée on Doheny, which was a French restaurant next to a French nightclub. And the guys that owned it, well, one of them was no longer welcome in France because he owed a lot of taxes. And his partner was still in France and hadn't been caught, but they owned a notorious sex club outside of Versailles. Very interesting characters. I wrote a new menu. Now, this menu was all my own creations because now I was getting pretty creative at Club Élysée. And I was at Club Élysée for exactly a year. And I left Club Élysée to go open Michael's in Santa Monica.
Michael's was a defining restaurant.
Yes.
In LA. And by extension, in the United States, it's considered in some respects the birthplace, I'm quoting here, the birthplace of California cuisine. Was that your doing?
It's certainly the Southern California birthplace of California cuisine.
Which is defined how? What did you choose to do and make that was?
Well, the menu was in English. We did not pretend to be a French restaurant. The dishes were overwhelmingly French inspired, but it was an American restaurant with an American staff and an American name and modern art and a focus on California wine. It was the first restaurant where I worked where there was a really terrific wine list. The original wine director at Michael's in Santa Monica, Phil Reich, and I got along great because I'd been into wine since I was a teenager in France and realized, wow, this is good. And Michael's, did a lot of things first.
Such as?
Taking French cuisine and putting it in English. And I mean, all my menus until then had been written in French with little English subtitles underneath them. Michael's, we did away with that. We just went straight for the English description and used a lot of fresh local ingredients.
Well, the whole fresh local and I think seasonal thing, Michael's was a huge influence on that. Where did you, I want to say come up with that, but I guess that's a dumb phrase. How did you integrate that concept into a daily menu in a restaurant in America?
Just cooking the things that we like to make, really.
And what were signature dishes there that you were making?
Michael wrote a menu of his favorite dishes from French restaurants in LA and a few chefs in France that he admired. My job was simply to produce the menu. He didn't particularly like some of my specials, didn't like tomatoes, but it ultimately wasn't going to work because people were calling the restaurant asking for me, and that didn't go over really well. And 4 or 5 months in, I was approached by Patrick Terraille at Ma Maison because La Guillotine had been sold. La Guillotine had become a restaurant called La Ruche with the former maitre d' from L'Hermitage and a sous chef from L'Hermitage. But the silent partner wanted to sell out his shares, so half of that restaurant was available. And Patrick had approached me about taking over half of La Ruche and renaming it La Toque. And I was about to do that. And I left Michael's, I think, in August of 1979. And we opened La Toque in late October 1979.
Back in a moment. What was the ethos of La Toque? What were you doing?
Well, Patrick Turai gave me the name La Toque. He told me how to raise the money from investors. He told me what to call the restaurant. And he wrote the one-page little investment thing that I used to sign up 12 backers at $5,000 a piece, which took about a week. The whole thing was La Toque was going to be a chef's restaurant, which was still a fairly new thing. Now the menu was everything that I wanted to cook and exactly what I wanted to do, and it was all me.
Such as?
In the beginning, certainly lots of fresh vegetables, interesting salads, started to incorporate, at Club Élysée, I had started to incorporate Japanese technique and ingredients into my menus because I had been really taken by great sushi restaurants. I used to go to the Japanese restaurant in the Bonaventure Hotel in downtown LA. I used to go there for lunch once a week because the sushi master from Tokyo there had adopted me as his project to teach about the glories of sushi and Japanese cuisine. So I started incorporating some Asian influences. And at this point now, everything on the menu was my creation. I was in a very creative stage of my career where I was coming up with 2-3 new dishes a week.
Like what?
Mostly seafood dishes. Working with seafood and fresh fish has always been a big deal for me. I learned how to make beurre blanc. Then I started making beurre blanc in different flavors. Beurre blanc with different flavors was innovative. I made a Japanese inflected vinaigrette with whole grain mustard, sesame oil, and rice wine vinegar. Was hailed as revolutionary. So, well, it's tasty, but I just made vinaigrette out of Japanese ingredients. I mean, it's not like I'm a genius. The stuff tastes good and I like it. And it's where I first started doing a tasting menu. So I did a menu that we used to call the menu fantasy, was 5 courses, and it was a tasting menu with a progression of flavors. It was also where I started really becoming infatuated with wild mushrooms. I had a couple of foragers that were picking wild mushrooms and bringing them to me. And I was one of the chefs who was super open to that. And wild mushrooms remains a passion of mine to this day. I started cooking with fresh truffles. That's where I did my first all black truffle tasting menu in January.
I got to interrupt here because I may be among those who don't get it. What the hell is the thing? Why are truffles so wonderful?
Truffles are perhaps hard to appreciate. They're certainly challenging to cook with until you learn to make the most of them. A lot of the time, truffles are just put on things to raise the price or to be fancy. It took me years and years to learn how to coax the right flavors out of truffles, how to prepare them with the right things where the truffle flavor would really shine.
And what's the truffle flavor?
Truffle is a fungus. It grows in a symbiotic relationship with the roots of a host tree. There are 3 primary culinary truffle species that are cooked with around the world, originally all wild. The most expensive and exotic and strongest is the white truffle, which people assume comes from Alba, but in fact comes from a little wider region in northern Italy and east into Croatia and even up into Romania. It's a stronger, almost more garlicky, sharp flavor. Then there's the black winter truffle, also known as the Périgord truffle, which is the famous black French truffle. And it's my favorite. It's the most versatile. I use it in everything from eggs to ice cream. But at best, truffle flavor is both powerful and subtle at the same time. There's an aromatic quality to it that is quite unique. The aroma in truffles is generated by a number of very volatile chemical compounds that mimic a sexual pheromone that wild pigs go crazy for. And the way truffles reproduce in the wild is the wild pig gets hot for the truffle, smells and digs up the truffle, eats the truffle, and then distributes the spores of the truffle through the back end of the pig on the pig's travels through the forest, which is why they used to use pigs to find truffles, though now they use dogs because dogs are just so much easier to deal with. And the dog doesn't want to eat the truffle.
That picture will be in my mind for quite a while. I should point out, you are considered an expert. I've seen it written that you're the top truffle chef in North America. You received a knighthood from the Order of the Knights of the Truffle and Wines of Alba. This is more than a passing fancy for you.
Oh, yeah.
And you're not a fan of like truffle oil.
No. Well, truffle oil is all fake. It's all fake. Even when they say it's not, it's fake. It contains 2,4-dithiopentane, which is a chemical compound that was isolated by Italian chemists in the 70s. Truffle oil is a very new thing. If truffle oil was real, it would have been around since Roman times, but it's been around since the 70s. 2,4-dithiopentane actually is a byproduct of cracking petroleum.
Yum.
So truffle oil contains gasoline, folks.
Lovely. Your greatest fame, your greatest enduring celebrity comes from you moved La Toque from LA up to Northern California. When was that? 1998 or so?
1998.
And it's been in 2 locations up there since.
Right.
Along the way, you got a Michelin star 14 times. Are you still in the kitchen there?
Every night. Well, 5 nights a week.
You're hands-on?
Hands-on in the kitchen every night. I love my job. I have great crew, but I drive the bus every day.
Well, what are you making these days?
Over the course of my career, my food started out very French. It quickly morphed into, and I started at a time when nouvelle cuisine meant you could be creative. The first couple years I was cooking, you would have your little book, which was the Repertoire de la Cuisine, which is a little tiny red French Bible of culinary terms. You would need to memorize and learn hundreds of classical garnishes and sauces and presentations that Escoffier had made famous, because that's what all French menus were built out of. And when Nouvelle Cuisine came along, it was in time for someone like me who was restlessly creative for chefs to create their own dishes, often lighter, often using unconventional techniques or ingredients or combinations of things. So someone like me who loves to just create and think about things, it was perfect for me. Originally, my food was very, very French. You know, I was a disciple of Michel Girard, the Troisgros brothers, and the Nouvelle Cuisine.
You've got broiled Dover sole on your current tasting menu, at least the one that's online. So, I mean, you haven't given it up.
No. But over the arc of my career, I've incorporated a lot more Italian influence. When you look back over the last 50 years, French food came along and woke up and turned into something much lighter and much more interesting and much more dynamic. That was quickly followed by Italians waking up and becoming much more interesting and not just serving the same basic things. There's very creative food coming out of Italy, and also then radically creative food coming out of Spain. So I've incorporated a lot more international influence into my menus. Our pasta game now is particularly strong. Our tasting menu almost always has a pasta course in it.
Homemade, I guess?
Oh, absolutely. We are fanatics about making interesting. Pasta is actually a really interesting creative canvas. I have a lot of friends in Italy who are great chefs who I've had come here, I've gone there, and the same with Spain. I've found Spanish, Italian, and French food can actually integrate very effectively. And the latest thing is, food in England. When I started cooking, food in England was terrible. England is a very exciting place to go eat now. The whole world is a more interesting place to go eat now. So I've incorporated a lot of international twists into my the name of the restaurant is still French.
Let me talk about a couple. What's Garganelli?
Garganelli is a tube pasta, but it's rolled out by hand. So you roll out a ribbon of pasta and you cut it into squares and you roll it around the round end of a wooden spoon and roll it on a ridged board. So it looks a little bit like a penne, but it's thinner and has little ridges on it.
And I assume this is the current menu. You got Garganelli with acorn squash, brown butter, sage, and pistachio gremolata?
Right. So gremolata is traditionally herbs and breadcrumbs and lemon zest that's sprinkled on dishes as a garnish, especially in Provençal cooking. Sometimes we make it with pork rinds, with chicharron. That's really fun. And here we're making it with chopped pistachios. But the butternut squash, the chanterelle mushrooms, the brown butter, the sage, that's just because it's fall. It's super seasonal. That went on the menu about 10 days ago. It'll probably be around for another couple of weeks before it'll move into something else. The menu evolves a little bit every week. It evolves a lot, about every 3 to 4 weeks as we go from early fall into solid fall into late fall into early winter. It evolves a little more slowly than it used to, but there's a very deliberate seasonal pace.
I've never seen stuffed tempura squash blossoms. How do you stuff a squash blossom?
That's a very classic Italian dish where you take a squash blossom, it's the flower, and you fill it, you pipe it full typically of ricotta with some herbs and garlic, and then dip it in tempura batter and fry it. And it's with a very fresh tomato sauce. It's super seasonal, and that's going off the menu this week. Actually going to be replaced with a new dish with braised endive.
Ooh. Nice.
Tomatoes would be good for another month or so, but the best of the tomatoes are behind us now, and we're getting ready for a shift into really solid fall.
And to give people context for this, we're recording this in mid-October. You seem to be doing a lot with octopus. Why is that?
We've used octopus on the menu fairly frequently for the last 6 or 7 years. I've been eating octopus my whole career, but as sushi in a sushi bar. My first cookbook had a octopus dish in it, but that to me now is relatively boring. We cook octopus twice. We cook it until it's tender in olive oil with garlic and herbs. Takes it 2 hours, a little over 2 hours, depending on how big they are, until it's just tender. And then we chill it and set it aside. And then in service, we grill it, which gives a little bit of char to it and heats it up. But it started with eating really good octopus in Spain and going, octopus as a hot seafood dish is underappreciated. And for years, we bought the octopus from Spanish or Japanese vendors. But in the last 2 years, we've started using an octopus that we get fresh from Australia, from Fremantle, Australia. And it's the best octopus we've used yet.
You talk about Spanish seafood. On my last trip to Spain, I discovered the wonders of barnacles, which until I ate them there, and I'd been to Spain a fair amount, I hadn't seen them before. I just assumed they were something you scrape off a hull. But when you talk about bringing in product from Spain or Australia, there's all this talk about eating local. When do you want local, and when do you want to say, the local stuff just ain't as good as stuff I can get someplace else?
Local wins all ties has always been our rule. But restricting myself to just local has always felt like a big trap. Until very recently, truffles were not a local thing. There's a burgeoning fresh truffle industry in the wine country now and in North America, but it's only the last couple years that we've had fresh truffles from literally a few miles away, same day or next day.
Wow.
We've been getting, the Australians successfully started cultivating black truffles about 25 years ago. They've been commercially viable at scale for about 15 years now. So we get their winter truffles from mid-June through August, which means that we get to cook with black winter truffles and ingredients in the summertime here that we don't have in the wintertime. So we get 2 seasons. So in the winter, I get to cook with black winter truffles and winter vegetables and winter foods. And in the summertime, I get to cook with Australian winter truffles and things like local Northern California corn. And let me tell you that truffles and butter and corn may be the single best use of truffles ever.
Well, you do an all truffle menu.
Yes. We now do one in the summer and we do one in the winter.
I'm looking at one example. It's octopus carpaccio, summer bean salad, and fresh black truffle. Truffles studded Hokkaido scallop, Wolf Ranch quail with black winter truffle. How do I phrase this? Truffle is seen in some aspects as a gimmick.
And it can be. It absolutely can be.
And the flavor of the truffles actually works with all of these different proteins?
Well, when you learn how to use truffles properly and not just throw them on things, let alone sprinkle things with truffle oil, which just poisons your palate. The scallops, for example, truffles like protein and fat. The chemical compounds that give truffles their flavor bond to protein. So if you take truffles and cut them into batons and push them through a rack of veal or a beef tenderloin, or I like to take a salmon steak and cut a few slits in it and put a slice of truffle in it and then seal it up in a sous vide bag and let it sit overnight in the refrigerator. The salmon, or in that case, the scallops, the protein actually absorbs the flavor of truffle. But one of the best tricks is, and the best evidence of truffle's affinity for protein, is when you store fresh truffles in a tightly sealed container with whole fresh eggs, the truffle flavor will permeate through the pores in the eggshell, through the egg white, and bond with the protein and the fat in the egg yolk. The white will have no flavor and the yolk will taste like you put truffles in it. You can store eggs with truffles for 2 days and then scramble the eggs without even putting truffle in them, and you can taste the truffles. And when you smell the empty shell after you crack the egg, it smells like you're shoving a truffle up your nose. So truffle's flavor will bond with proteins and fat. And when you learn how to do that, the most you're ever going to get out of truffles is somewhat subtle. But people who appreciate the nuances in a great bottle of Burgundy, people who appreciate nuances in food can find a lot to appreciate about truffles. People, and Americans in particular, tend to like our things crunchy, sweet and salty, spicy. We Americans tend to like big flavored foods with big textures, and truffle is not always that unless you use truffle oil. The problem with truffle oil is it tastes fake and it stains your palate. And when you've eaten something with truffle oil, even the tiniest amount, it stays with you for hours. It drives me crazy. And the other thing is, truffles are expensive. People don't use enough. You need to go big or go home. Do it one time, but use plenty. Don't put a little bit here and a little bit there, because it's like eating 2 little grains of caviar. You need a spoonful of caviar to be happy, not 2 little grains. And the same is very true with truffles. But at best, it's always going to be a nuanced kind of thing that someone with a great wine cellar who can appreciate a 30-year-old Barolo or a fine Burgundy and the nuances from one vineyard to the next, which some people think it's silly, but some of us enjoy those things. And if you appreciate nuance, truffle has a lot to offer.
You said, quite rightly in my view, that Americans are not into nuanced flavor. We want that big red wine. We want that big steak. How do you feel about the state of dining in America these days?
Well, Americans have never eaten better. There are good restaurants now all over America. Young chefs in their 30s and 40s or 20s that have worked for great chefs in big cities. All big cities now have a few very good restaurants. Being a chef is a very respected thing. Food on TV is a big deal. We're in a really great place. Food is becoming more casual. Nobody wears a tie to a restaurant anymore. We have people come in shorts, and I kind of cringe, but it is what it is. That's where society is going. But we've never eaten better. There are farmers markets and networks of artisans and ranchers and fishermen and purveyors producing world-class products. American chefs have access to equally awesome products as chefs anywhere in the world. Europe used to have an advantage. That's gone. American purveyors have really, really cracked the code in terms of the ducks we get from Liberty Ducks. They are spectacular ducks. They're as good as a duck from anywhere. Whereas, 30, 40 years ago, a duck was a duck and it came from Long Island and it was frozen. But in France, they had 5 different kinds of ducks. Well, now we have great ducks here. We have all kinds of produce and fruits, and people have rediscovered heirloom varieties of stone fruits and apples. And there's an awareness of food. So on the one hand, America is eating a very unhealthy processed food heavy diet. We eat way too much protein. We eat way too much corn and soybean and wheat and everything that's produced from that. But America also has some of the best cooking and some of the best fresh foods in the world if you care to look for them and if you have access to them and if you can afford them. It's not inexpensive and not everybody has access to it. There's a lot of room for improvement in the American diet, but you can eat spectacularly well here now.
The restaurant business has been buffeted, that's probably not a strong enough word, by the economy. Concerned? Is fine dining dead?
Well, first, you need to look at the pandemic. The pandemic was ideally designed to destroy the restaurant business. It involved everybody hiding from everybody, not going out in public, not being together. And restaurants are about people getting together in confined spaces and having a great time. So the pandemic was devastating. We've recovered from the pandemic. There was a surge of dining, pent-up demand and travel after the pandemic. And now we've settled into a weird, very uncertain economy. America recovered far better than the rest of the world, but the world economy is still very uncertain. The whole tariff thing right now, it is hard, and costs for restaurants have gone up. The medical insurance premiums we pay have gone up. The wage scale has gone up. The cost of food. Restaurants are on the front line of the economy. Restaurants are very much disposable income. And even at the very highest price points, finest restaurants, we are a leading economic indicator. Restaurants are on the leading edge of the economy. And when restaurants are sensing trouble, it's a very good indication that our immediate future is somewhat uncertain. That said, I've been doing this a long time. I've been through this before. We'll get through this too.
Well, Chef, you have been doing it for a long time, and you've been doing it so remarkably well. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to chat with me today.
Oh, it's been my pleasure.
You going to stay in the kitchen much longer?
I'm going to be 70. I imagine I will be actively cooking probably another 10 years. I can't imagine not doing that. I have a great staff, especially the team I've had for the last 3-4 years is really, really strong. It's allowing me to step back and spend less time, mentor them more. I don't have 90-hour work weeks in me anymore, but
You've got a few new dishes yet to come out with.
Oh yeah. And 40 to 50 hours a week is a recreational amount for me. I love being in the kitchen. I like the customers. I like my team. I like eating. It's a very dynamic business. There's always something new to learn. I'm still learning, and it's really exciting to learn. I mean, cooking is a bit like playing jazz. You should continue to get better as you get older.
And you should continue to enjoy it, as it's clear you are, Chef.
When I stop enjoying it, I will get out of the kitchen. I could retire if I had to, but I don't want to.
Well, keep having fun.
That's the plan.
Thank you again for doing this. I can't thank you enough.
Been my pleasure. Thank you.
Ken Frank on Culinary Characters Unlocked. I'm David Page. I'll see you next time. And check out the Culinary Characters Unlocked Substack.